It is certainly my privilege and pleasure to welcome you to the final session of the Smart Growth Summit, and we are really delighted that HNTB is sponsoring this, but also that we have the very special guest in the house, Secretary Fox's in-laws. The Riders, would you stand up and let us say thank you to you? Thank you. And we are closing out. We're going to have a slide up. We're going to invite you all to come to the Lamar building after this. And why in the world are we having an off-site session? It's because it is the perfect example of a repurposing of a very unattractive building into a wonderful new Lamar headquarters. So it really is an example. I would now like to welcome our mayor, Kip Holden, maybe our lieutenant governor, but I hope that he has just done such a good job as our mayor. The reason that Anthony Fox is here, Secretary Fox is here today is because of Mayor Holden. So I want you to welcome him and help me thank Melvin Kip Holden, our mayor.
Thank you. And welcome and good afternoon to everybody. This really has been a very exciting day in Baton Rouge, but now you get the icing on the cake this afternoon. And as Boo was talking about the in-laws, it's kind of a small world. When I first met the secretary, it was unfortunately under Hurricane Katrina, where he so graciously opened the doors up in his hometown in Charleston. And basically, this guy is like one of the most unique people you'll ever meet in your life, because he never complained one time about the people from Louisiana coming into his city. And if there was red carpet to be rolled out, it would have been. But they rolled out the red carpet to their hearts. And I was thinking, I think about these different things. I said, well, how about just calling him the male version of the Statue of Liberty? Give me your tired, your poor, your huddled masses yearning to be free. He was that for Louisiana. And a guy who has more compassion than one of the many, many officials that I've been able to meet in my life. And you'll hear that compassion has been reflected even right here in Baton Rouge, because he has worked on and still working on some major projects that we will be announcing later. But let me just go back again and say, thanks to his in-laws, I was able to stay in a nice place, and they didn't knock on my door for money. They knew we were broke. But absolutely great. But as I talk about our guest today, believe me, we are very, very fortunate, because what else is special about this man? He left being mayor of Charlotte and then joined the Obama administration. But when you go into his office, it is like being at home. Nothing stuffy at all. But a person who says, although I'm in this position higher than the city level, I'm here to change the face and dynamics of as many cities and as many ways that are under my jurisdiction. And so he's been a friend to a lot of states. He joined the United States Department of Transportation after serving as the mayor of Charlotte from 2009 to 2013. During that time, he made efficient, innovative transportation investments in the centerpiece of Charlotte, job creation, and economic recovery efforts. These investments included extending the Lynx light rail system, the largest capital project ever undertaken by the city, which will build new roads, bridges, transit, as well as bicycle and pedestrian facilities. Expanding the Charlotte Douglas International Airport, the 6th busiest in the world, working with the North Carolina Governor, Beverly Perdue, to accelerate the I-485 Outer Belt, using a creative design, build, finance approach, the first major project of its kind in North Carolina, and starting the Charlotte Streetcar Project. I could go on and on about this man, but the best way to properly introduce him, in my opinion, is from these words that were said by a famous writer. He said, "Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?" Please welcome the Honorable Secretary of the United States Department of Transportation, a guy who not only had visions, but made those happen for many cities across America, the Honorable Anthony Fox.
Man, thank you. Thank you so much. Good to see you, man. Thank you. You're amazing. Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Holden, my good friend here in Baton Rouge, for that wonderful and warm introduction. There's nothing like being introduced by Mayor Holden. Let me thank Boo Thomas, President and CEO of the Center for Planning Excellence. Your Secretary of Transportation here in Louisiana, Sherry Labat, who's doing such a great job for the folks here in Louisiana. I'm at home here in Baton Rouge. I'm at home in Baton Rouge because this is the home of my wife and her parents, Doctors Bill and Exie Ryder, who you've been introduced to already. They, for many years, were professors here at Southern University, and also for many years the landlord to your then future mayor, Kip Holden. But from the time that I first came to Baton Rouge back in the late 1990s, this has been home for me, and they've been family. And I just want to say thank you so much for being here today. To you, Bill and Exie, thank you. I'm going to talk today about the next frontier. And I want to frame it in this way. If you're reading the newspaper or watching the news these days, you know that the gap between the wealthy and the poor and middle class is getting wider and wider and wider. And this gap doesn't know any boundary. It doesn't confine itself to urban areas or rural areas or even suburban areas. It's not confined to race, and it's not confined to geography, because this gap exists all over our country. But this widening gap threatens the core of the American dream. The idea that no matter where you come from, if you work hard enough, you can make it in America. And under President Barack Obama, we have been working, and we will continue to work to make America great again, and we're trying to do that right now. I want to talk a little bit about the next frontier, because when we think about how this challenge of increasing the size of the American pie, increasing opportunity for everybody, there are certain pillars of it that come to mind very quickly. Pillars like a strong economy. That's one pillar of opportunity. The more economic activity we have, the greater the size of the pie. And over the last 6 years, this administration has taken the nation from the depths of the Great Recession to, by my count, 67 straight months of job growth, 13.2 million jobs, And the administration has worked to reduce the nation's deficit by 2/3. We are on a path to a stronger economy. Another pillar is education. The administration has moved the dial on education, spurring the nation's best high school graduation rates in decades, and putting focus back on children, not adults. And I have to say this because he's one of my favorite people, but my colleague Arnie Duncan, who, as the president has said, has been perhaps the most consequential education secretary, is soon to step away from his role, but he has been a remarkable beacon of light in this issue of education over the course of his tenure. Health is also a key pillar of opportunity. How can one be successful if one isn't healthy? This administration has addressed one of the most bedeviling policy issues of the last 50 years, shepherding the Affordable Care Act and finally extending health care to 17 million people so far and counting, previously uninsured people, and in the process steadying the rate of increase in medical costs and bending the curve on related federal spending. Let me make that point a little more clear. Before the ACA, we were spending a larger and larger and larger share of the federal budget on managing health risks to people in the system. And the ACA is now reducing the rate of growth in the federal budget attributable to health care because now people are actually getting treated. And so that is helping us reduce the deficit because it's taking away costs that had been plugged into the system before. That is good for everybody. But I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that open enrollment started on November 1st for 2016, and that folks have until December 15th to sign up and start the new year with coverage. And so we need the help of community and business leaders like you to get the message out and help us tell those who don't have health insurance they can go to healthcare.gov. I promise you it works. Now to see what options are available for them and their families and help us encourage people who signed up last year to stay on. So health is another pillar. So we've got economy, education, health, and then of course housing and job skills are components of opportunity. And as our housing markets strengthen and we become even more connected in governmental levels, working between the federal government and community colleges and universities and vocational schools and the private sector, we're starting to blend effective job skills training for the jobs of the 21st century, and that is a critical pillar of opportunity. And so these are the things that I would say we think conventionally of as connectors of opportunity, and I would submit to you today they're not the only pillars of opportunity, and there's at least one more that should be added to that list, and that's transportation. And this is what I mean when I talk about transportation as the next frontier. Think about this. Think about, for most American families, the second largest expense in their family budgets besides housing is transportation. And this line item in folks' budget can either be the lifeline to greater opportunity, or it can be one of the things that makes it harder for people to access opportunity. So let me talk about transportation not as throughput, but as the critical connector to jobs, to medical appointments and better health, to education, to housing and job training. Think about transportation like an iPad. You know, if transportation were if opportunity were an iPad, transportation would be like the operating system. You can't run an app without having some system to operate it on. So all of these things that we expect out of our quality of life are dependent on our ability to get there. As I say to my team, you know, transportation doesn't hire you, but it makes getting and keeping work possible. It doesn't treat illness, but it makes getting health care possible. It doesn't teach, but it makes learning possible. It's not a house, but you try getting to yours without it. That's the way I think about transportation. I see transportation as having a much bigger impact than just taking people from the Ninth Ward to a job, however, or from Far Rockaways to a doctor, or from my native West Charlotte to a school, or from Southside Chicago to an apartment, or even in Old South Baton Rouge to a job training program. Transportation at its best is not just getting someone from Old South Baton Rouge to opportunity. Transportation should also help bring opportunity to Old South Baton Rouge. In other words, if we just think of transportation as a way to get from A to B, I think we're missing an opportunity to think about it in terms of getting people from A to B, but also strengthening those points that are being connected. And so if we do our jobs right in transportation, the economy will get better because there'll be more people working. Education will be better because there'll be more people with great access to good schools. Neighborhoods will be better because they'll be more connected, and housing stock will be better, and job training will be better because the markets will find opportunity in these places in ways that they hadn't done before. So in many ways, we should stop just talking about getting people to the doorstep of opportunity. We should be thinking in terms of getting opportunity to the doorstep. That's what I think is one of our great challenges of the 21st century. And my friends here in Baton Rouge, I was privileged enough just a few weeks ago to be in the well of the U.S. House of Representatives to hear Pope Francis deliver remarks to our nation's leaders. It was a very powerful moment. He said many things, but one of the things that struck me was his simple reminder that the poor are our neighbors, and whether we like it or not, our futures are inextricably linked to theirs. They are, and I'm using his words now, men and women who strive every day to do an honest day's work and build a better life. Men and women who are not simply concerned with paying their taxes, but in their own quiet way sustain the life of society. And if you think about it, what in the world do we do as a society that involves more of us than building a transportation system? It is literally the thread that connects all of us and allows us to be connected to each other. And so when we think about transportation as a connector, as an opportunity expander, it opens the door to more and more people to work and other vital aspects of life, we're helping ourselves. When we extend opportunity, we nourish that spirit of work and determination that helped found this nation. And yet, to do that, we as a community of transportation decision makers must embrace our role in closing the opportunity gap. And I have to be honest with you that in previous generations, not only did we not do that, we actually did the opposite. Just in the last 50 or 60 years, this nation has built highways and railways and airports, partly by carving up neighborhoods, leaving bulldozed homes and broken dreams and sapping needy families of the one connection to wealth they had, which were their homes. And this isn't just a phenomenon of the South. This happened all over America. Every place I've been to over the course of my tenure in this role, there is a freeway or a railway or an airport or something that's left a bitter taste and a wall that's been so difficult for people to climb. And so there's a term now that folks are using to describe this impact of our transportation system called structural discrimination. Instead of a lifeline, transportation facilities in some cases became a wall. And this wall conveyed to those affected that the checks they wish to cash at the Bank of Opportunity would be returned due to insufficient funds. Their children couldn't run as far as the horizon because they couldn't see the sun behind the overpass. New housing, good grocery stores, pharmacies, and other neighborhood services could not find them, literally could not find them because those communities were trapped. And as I've gone around the country, there are even names that people have given to these different projects. They call the Staten Island Expressway up in New York the Mason-Dixon line, and in Syracuse they have a highway that's called the Berlin Wall. That's just a couple of names that they're calling transportation facilities in this country. The vestiges of this system are still with us. The walls are still up, and yet as we reach a point in the life of our infrastructure where the deferred maintenance bill comes due, we have an opportunity here in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, all across America, to make this generation of American transportation planning the most restorative in our history. Imagine bridges and overpasses that are more than just north-south throughputs. Imagine unleashing the ingenuity of our nation's land use planners and engineers and decision makers to make those facilities more inviting and approachable and perhaps even complementary to the surroundings on their east and west sides. Imagine more meaningful public input processes that use technology and capture the views of the public at a stage of planning when that input can actually be incorporated into a project. Imagine some of the most challenged communities in America where instead of being limited by their environments, they're opened up, where property values are going up, where access to jobs right in those neighborhoods is going up. This is the way that transportation can provide a reincarnation, if you will, of the American dream in a new and better development. One in which everyone really does have a shot, and one in which no zip code is confined to be the hardest one to get out of. You know, I've watched the last couple of years as our nation has had a series of incidents, including Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, and the Garner situation in New York. And in every case, I can point to some infrastructure decision that maybe 30 years ago or 40 years ago have added to the stress and strains that are being seen by the entire world. And so I think that as we think about the future of transportation here, we should be thinking about it in terms of how not only are we going to get more cars through, or more trucks through, or more rail through, but what does the investment in transportation mean to the life of people here in Baton Rouge? How is it going to make people's lives better? How is it going to create expanded opportunity? Now, the truth is, I can stop imagining some of this because I'm starting to see it happen in places around the country. For example, in Crenshaw, Los Angeles, there's a new light rail connector that's being built there, and a young lady by the name of Ladea Epps. She's a working mom. She has 3 children. And before this light rail line was coming into her neighborhood, she was taking a bus, and I think she was taking 2 or 3 transfers a day just to get to work. So the city started working on this project, and there were some hiring signs associated with it, so she decided she was going to apply for the job. She'd never worked on a construction project in her life. But because there was a relationship between this project and the community college, she went and got trained and ultimately got hired, and now she's working in the very neighborhood she lives in. And think about how much time she's saving transferring buses. Now she can help her kids with homework. And incidentally, what she says now is she says that she thinks that there need to be more women in transportation projects because they do the job better. I see it in Rochester, New York, where instead of homes being raised for a highway, there's actually a highway that's being raised to make Rochester feel like the home it once was. Or Columbus, Ohio, where they're capping a freeway, I-75, which once bifurcated a community. They're restoring the connection that used to be there. Or in Detroit, where famously there was a man who was walking 21 miles a day to get to work because the bus system had fallen into such a state of disrepair. Can you imagine how badly you have to want to work to walk 21 miles a day in America? Well, as a result of seeing the evidence of this, we put $25 million into the city of Detroit to buy them new rolling stock buses. And Detroit now should be running on time. And this man who's been walking 21 miles ought to be able to get on a bus. That's the kind of effort I'm talking about, and I think that's connected back to what Pope Francis had to say, which is that a lot of our folks in this country are just good, hardworking people. They just need a crack in the door. And so that's what we're trying to do. And that's what I need you to think about here in Baton Rouge. For far too long, transportation has just been a way to get from one place to another. Even looking at some of the design of our roadways, we haven't always been so aesthetically interested. But as we think about how transportation plays into our environment, I don't think you add another dime to the budget by just trying to make the overpass look a little more inviting to a pedestrian, or by using more of the road work by putting some of our roads on road diets so that the bicyclists know where they can be and the walkers know where they should be and the cars know where they should be. These are simple things we can do that create a little more opportunity for folks. So, how do we do that? Our department is working through some new strategies to focus national, state, and local attention on helping to create more opportunity in this country. And in fact, last year, the mayor alluded to this, we launched something called the Ladder Step Initiative in 7 cities, of which Baton Rouge is one. We're using the technical capabilities of our department to help mayors, including yours, complete transportation projects that will help remove barriers to opportunity and promote good economic development. In Baton Rouge, we've been working with Mayor Holden and other city officials to plan a Nicholson Street Corridor streetcar line. And as part of this initiative, our Federal Transit Administration has been helping the city navigate in the environmental process and to select the best alignment for the line. I understand it will connect the Central Business District to LSU. And while our Federal Highway Administration has also been working to train city engineers on the complete street standards that I referenced before. Across the country, we've placed increased emphasis on last mile connections. We're doing this by supporting the evolution of flexible street designs that are safer and more accessible for everyone who needs to use them, including pedestrians. We've launched a disparity study in the railroad arena, one of the few areas of government without a disadvantaged business program. We're stepping up Title VI enforcement, and we're working to update our guidance on Title VI, which hasn't been done since the 1970s. I'd also have to say that we're looking to use some of these authorities to ensure that access to other things is expanded. And I would add to that that we are looking at Alabama, for instance, where I understand Some of our federally supported DMV offices have been closed. We're reviewing this matter because that obviously has an impact on folks' access to driver's licenses. We're supporting workforce programs that are training a new generation of transit workers. These are providing opportunities to learn on the job and to get connected with career development and skills training. By the way, we're hiring air traffic controllers, and you want to talk about good jobs, these are some good jobs. Air traffic controllers don't have to have a college degree, and these jobs pay six figures because they are pretty important jobs. So we're trying to attract a new generation into transportation careers, perhaps even folks that may not have historically have thought about them. I recently created a new position at USDOT called the Chief Opportunities Officer. And I've asked my former Deputy Chief of Staff, Stephanie Jones, to serve in that role to ensure that opportunity and inclusion are part of everything we do. And last month, we launched a transit-oriented development initiative focused on revitalizing economically distressed areas. We've seen how investment in transit can lead to new housing stock, new jobs, new economic opportunities in places that badly need them. But there's another point I want to make here, which is that we're constrained by the vision that our local communities have. In other words, the U.S. Department of Justice changed jobs. The U.S. Department of Transportation doesn't come into a community and tell you how to build your community or how to build your state. We rely on you to have that vision. And once you have developed that vision, then we try to help you achieve it. And so, in many ways, what I'm talking about really comes down to the conversations you're having here at your city council, at your metropolitan planning organization, at your state level. How do you want to grow? How do you want to grow together? How do you want to increase opportunity here? And so we'll continue working with you on that great vision. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't mention one other thing that's happening in Washington right now, and that is that as we sit here today, there is active debate on the House floor of a surface transportation bill. And I want to explain this to you. We have not had a 6-year transportation bill pass Congress in more than a decade. And since 2009, we have had 35 short-term extensions. The last 3, and I think I got this right, were 2 months, 3 months, and 10 months. And I know y'all are really good, but you show me a 10-month, 2-month, 3-month project that's going to make a big difference here in Baton Rouge. There probably isn't one that you can start and finish in those increments of time. So there's active debate about a long-term bill. And I wanted you to understand what this means to you. Louisiana is a growing state. And I know that before Katrina, you had one size population, and after Katrina, you added 100,000 people. And everything from getting around the Walmart to driving down I-10 has gotten harder because you've got more people in a contained space. You know what rapid growth feels like, and folks, the reality is that this growth is going to continue. If it feels like you can't get anywhere on your roads because they're congested, just think about what it's going to be like 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And we've done some work to look at the cost to folks here in Louisiana through the American Society of Civil Engineers, and they say that the poor road conditions in this state, and it's not unique to this state, there are poor road conditions all over the country because of the underinvestment. But they say that the poor quality of roads in Louisiana is costing Louisiana motorists $464 a year. So everybody here who's got a car or uses a car, that's roughly the cost. So we did some quick math. We said, well, how many motorists are here in Louisiana? And when you multiply those two numbers, we got $1.3 billion annually you're spending to pay for poor roads. And we did this because, you know, it's going to cost some money for us to build our transportation system up. It's going to cost some money for Congress to actually pay for a long-term bill. But actually, you're going to get some of it back if our roads get into the shape that you need them in. Even if you couldn't eliminate the entire cost you're spending, even if you cut it in half, that would be $650 million back in the pockets of Louisiana drivers. It's not a small amount of money. And I would argue that for this state, sustained investment at that $650 million level over and above what we're spending today, if we spent that money, it would actually be cheaper to solve the problem than it would be to let it keep getting worse and worse and worse. So I need you all here in this room, you are the leaders here in Baton Rouge and across many states, to keep raising your voices about the need for a long-term bill, and to keep raising your voices about the need for Congress to act on this and to get something done. Once Congress passes a long-term bill, we can stop talking about whether the lights are going to be on for a few more months and start doing long-term projects that are going to dramatically reduce congestion. The last point that I'll make as I close out here, and I think we're going to have some conversation, is that the only other piece of advice I would give you is that we have to stop working just within the political jurisdictions that we have. I come from a city, Charlotte, that was the largest city in its region, much like Baton Rouge. And we had a metropolitan planning system where we had actually 5 MPOs within our sphere of economic influence, and it was impossible to prioritize that way. And what we've started to realize was that the way that the economy is moving in our region was different than the political jurisdictions. I think it's really important as you think about the future of how this region is going to come together, that you plan together with those with whom you are joined economically. And that may mean bringing in some of the suburban and rural areas that aren't traditionally part of the conversation. We're encouraging this in every state across America because, again, the plans have to come from you, but if you are planning at a smaller level than your economy's functioning, then you're not going to be able to get the biggest bang for the dollars you're spending. So with that, I want to thank all of you for being here today. I want to thank you for the great work you're doing. But mostly what I want to tell you is think beyond transportation as a functional thing. It's actually part of the life of this community and part of the life of the state. And if you think about it as something that is a connector, something that opens the door to opportunity, it may lead you to some non-traditional ways of thinking how transportation can happen here and actually pack a bigger punch. Thank you very much. It's great to be with you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I'm going to say a few words.
Please,
here,
yes.
And then I'm going to join you over there.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. I'm Sherry LaBai. I'm Secretary of the Louisiana Department of Transportation. And I just want to say, Secretary Fox, thank you so much for being with us here today. And Mayor Kip Holden shared some words about Secretary Fox and about how accessible he is and how willing he is to talk to us and work with us. And I want to echo that as well. We have national meetings up in DC or really different places around the country. It's called the AASHTO, American Association Society of Transportation Highway Officials. And Secretary Fox, you're always so generous with your time, coming to those meetings. We get to meet with him just as a group, the CEOs of all the state DOTs, and we get to ask him questions, and he tells us what's going on in Washington. He shares his vision, and we appreciate so much the time that you do. I mean, because you travel to our meetings, and I know that takes time out of your busy schedule, but you come meet with us, and we appreciate the time that you spend with us. You know, I just participated in a panel discussion in New Orleans on the report from your office titled Beyond Traffic 2045 Trends and Choices. And I want to thank you for your vision in the development of this document, as it lays out very well where we are and where our current trends may take us as the population and the travel demands increase. And as we plan for the future, we must continue to have discussions on future plans and visions for transportation, whether it's the current aging of current infrastructure, increased congestion, improving safety, new technology, which we know there's a lot of new technology out there that could affect transportation and most likely will affect it, funding levels required, and these issues must be discussed. And this document is spurring that discussion, which is what you intended it to do. So we had a great discussion down in New Orleans about what we need to do as a nation to address transportation needs and thus the economic growth of our nation. And this conference is an example of one of those opportunities to have this discussion. And so, Boo, thank you so much to you and your staff for putting on this conference. I think you've had excellent speakers and presentations and just a lot of really robust, good dialogue going on. You know, in Louisiana, we have the same challenges that other states face: aging infrastructure and congestion. And to address these issues, we've been working hard to invest the taxpayers' dollars efficiently and effectively. Since 2008, we've invested more than $7.4 billion in our transportation system. And this equates into 3,100 improvement projects, including approximately 9,000 miles of roadway, 490 bridges, and some examples of major corridor improvement projects which are under construction or have been completed are I-49 north from I-220 to the Arkansas state line. I got to participate in cutting the ribbon at the Arkansas state line with Secretary Scott Bennett of Arkansas, so that was a fun day. And then segments on I-49 south, and more than $340 million has been invested in improvements right here in the capital region on I-10 and I-12. A resurfacing on project on I-55 has been greatly improved. The safety and the ride is so smooth now. And really, the majority of our transportation trust fund dollars are invested in the preservation of our existing infrastructure, which our forefathers gave us, which we've got to preserve our infrastructure. To improve the traffic flow in the capital city, we currently have feasibility studies underway for improving the I-10 corridor. And Secretary Fox, I just want to let you know in that improvement project that we have underway, we're doing what you talked about, and that's looking at ways that we can enhance the corridor instead of just going in and adding a lane. What can we do to bring the communities together? What can we do to enhance the community around I-10? And we've had some public meetings, and we've gotten a lot of good input as to way we can provide a way to provide those enhancements and ideas that people have, whether it's some sidewalks or bike paths or a bridge. We've talked about a pedestrian bridge crossing the LSU Lake. So just different enhancements that are being thought of as we go through that process. In addition, we have a feasibility study underway for a new South Mississippi River Bridge crossing. You know, our road transfer program is gaining traction and support, and Secretary Fox, you mentioned that in your comments. Two projects that I want to talk about: the Government Street Road Diet, as we call it, will provide sidewalks, bike paths along Government Street, and we feel just will really enhance that community, make it a place that people really want to come to. They want to come hang out. and go to all the shops along there, sort of a little art corridor as well. Maybe I'm a little biased in that. I have a son who is an art student about to graduate at LSU. Another project is the Nicholson Road project. We are just so excited about that. And just to tell you a little bit about the road transfer program, this is a program where we look at our network of state and local highways and we say, you know, there's some of these state highways really need to be local roads. They need to be. And so that gives the opportunity for the locals to decide what do they want to do with their roads, how do they want them to look, how do they want them to feel in the community. So another one, Nicholson Road, will be transferred over to the city after we do the improvements on it, which include a wider median. Again, we're looking at bike paths, sidewalks. And, you know, I too want to mention the Ladder Step program for FTA's assistance in planning of the Nicholson Street Corridor street line. I mean, that's just a really exciting project to be able to connect LSU to the downtown area by a street line car. So these initiatives, along with our Complete Streets policy, are making great strides and improvement to our livability in the Baton Rouge and the Louisiana, other areas in Louisiana. We expect to go out to construction of LA 42 in Ascension Parish, which is a totally complete streets project. It's also designed using access management and J-turns design. So we're hoping to go out with that letting in the spring, so we're very excited about that. We also have numerous projects to enhance economic development, improve evacuation routes and safety, and make essential restorations and improvement where needed. Safety of the traveling public is our #1 priority. Safety infrastructure improvements include strategic placement of cable barriers, you've probably seen those on the interstates, utilizing roundabouts, access management, and J-turns. Through our Destination Zero Deaths initiatives, which began in 2007, our fatalities on our highways has decreased by approximately 30%. This is an initiative that's collaborative between Highway Safety Commission, law enforcement, and DOTD. We are a multimodal state. We're fortunate. We have so many waterways in our state, and we utilize these waterways to move goods and services, which is imperative to a healthy economy, not only in Louisiana, but the nation as well. Approximately $20 million of our state transportation trust funds are invested in our Port Priority Program every year. Since 1989, $519 million has been invested to date, which translates to 12,546 jobs created or retained and 342 contracts completed. We're also in the process of working with the Corps of Engineers on a feasibility study to deepen the Mississippi River from 45 feet to 50 feet so that larger ships can navigate the river. This will allow us to stay competitive and meet future needs. And 6 Class 1 railroads operate within our borders, and 69 publicly owned airports serve our aviation needs. We invest about $30 million a year in state transportation trust fund dollars for our aviation projects. We also have what we call our Intermodal Connector Program. We put in our priority program each year $10 million to connect our intermodal connectors, as our goal is to provide a smooth transition from one mode of transportation to another. And recently, the legislature and the governor created a multimodal commissioner position at DOTD, which takes effect in January, and the new governor will have an opportunity to appoint the multimodal commissioner. The New Orleans Regional Transit Authority recently received a Tiger Grant, and I thank Secretary Fox, thank you so much for that, for the New Orleans Canal Street Ferry Terminal. This location is the first privatized ferry service in Louisiana, and improving this ferry terminal will improve the walkability and the riverfront and just will enhance the access to the ferry. So we're just very excited for the New Orleans area for this. We're in the process of updating our statewide transportation plan. Our plan covers all modes of transportation. We expect to have it approved by the policy committee this November. And numerous DOTD staff and stakeholders have worked many hours to set the vision for transportation in the state. And we have used our previous statewide transportation plan in making decisions for investments in transportation. It's a forward-thinking plan, and I also want to take this opportunity to thank our federal partners. They're in the audience today, and we could not have the success that we have without them. So a big thank you to all of you. And you know, I tell my staff and give the message all the time that what you're doing every day is working to improve the quality of lives through transportation. And you know, I applaud you all for being here, because that's what you do too. That's your passion, and you wouldn't be here if you didn't have a passion for improving transportation, so, and the quality of life for people. So again, Secretary Fox, thank you for working with us. Thank you for your leadership and vision at the national level, and we look forward to our continued partnership. And with that, I'm going to go over and sit over here, and we are going to take questions from the audience.
Thank you. Very kind of you.
So with that, oh, look, we already have a hand up. Great.
Sure. Secretary Fox, your comments were right on, very exciting that we're thinking about transportation in new ways. One of the issues that I've always been fascinated about was that in 1956, President Eisenhower championed the Interstate Highway and Defense Act. Got it passed, really excited, based it upon the models he had seen in Germany, where they were connecting the cities with these high-capacity interstates, essentially. And then in the 60s, I found out, I didn't know about this, that he got real upset when he found out that they were actually taking the interstates through the heart of our cities. And you spoke to the ramifications of that. And yet, we've got, you know, we're more than 50 years out now from this, what I consider a failed experiment of trying to take these interstates that, you know, are perfect for going between cities, right in the heart of our cities. And I haven't seen a multi-way boulevard as part of the interstate system yet in the United States. Is the Department of Transportation trying to authorize things like that? Because when I go through a city like Atlanta, I can't go 70 miles an hour through the center of, you know, on I-75 and I-85, going through the center of it. I'm typically, on a day, I'm lucky if I'm going 35. So has there been any discussion about increasing the options that the states have as they go and they build these interstates that would allow a slower moving traffic through our cities, yet still handle the exact same capacity of cars going through?
So this is a really good question, and thank you for it. We're in the process of giving state departments of transportation more design flexibility. The U.S. Department of Transportation's had more of a kind of cookie-cutter design approach. We recognize that because there are different push-pulls in different communities, that sometimes the cookie-cutter approach doesn't work. And so we're trying to step away from that a little bit and give more design flexibility at the state and local level. I also think this is important from another standpoint, which is that, you know, every place I go that has high congestion, people say, well, you know, if we just got another 2 lanes in the freeway, we would like reduce that congestion. And let me just tell you, I mean, let me save you the pain of realizing that when you build 2 more lanes, you might get like relief for a little while, but eventually your population growth is going to catch up with those lanes, and they're going to wear out on you. So there are 2 things that I think areas have to do. One is that you have to think in terms of building complementary systems away from your arterial roads so that people have multiple ways to get from one place to another. The old east, west, north, south street designs were actually very elegant because if you were on one of the arterial roads, you could actually get off of one if it was too highly congested and find a different way to get there. I think that's really important. So your local land use planning has to relate to what the state's doing, and that's something that has to be done at the local and the state level. The other thing that I would say is that we have to, and the Secretary spoke to this, we have to be multimodal in the way that we think. In Washington, sometimes people get caught up in, you know, the fact that transit is often subsidized and that it takes 20% off of the gas tax, which is the way we pay for our highways. But the way that I think about it in fast-growing areas, if you get cars off the road, you now create throughput for those freeways, and that actually has tangible economic value. So I think you're getting to a point here where you really, your bus system is always going to be one of the backbones of those choices, but the bicycles, the pedestrians, and even rail transit and commuter rail, potentially getting that connection between Baton Rouge and New Orleans done. I think those types of things are going to be critical to helping you deal with the growth long term.
Thank you.
Secretary Fox, thank you for being here. One of the things that you touched on, and Secretary LeBlanc, you did as well, the emergence of technology. Right now with the apps like Waze and everything, and Uber and all those different modes, historically transportation departments have looked out at 20-year plans, 25-year, 30-year plans. But do we need to change our mindset and look at shorter-term plans, knowing that in 20 years from now, technology is going to be fully immersed in transportation, and perhaps some of the projects that we're planning for today in a 20-year plan that could cost billions of dollars might not actually be needed if we're thinking that the technology solutions will be there?
It's a great question. We're in transportation where like mobile phones were like 10 years ago. I mean, you realize like 12 years ago there was no iPhone? Like there was not an iPhone.
Hard to believe.
Crazy. And now, you can't get away from them. I think that you are going to see technology rapidly finding its way into transportation, but just like beta and VHS, it's going to be a while before we see it settle down to a point where the hard choices get made. So do I think we're going to see driverless cars? Yes. I think we're going to see connected vehicles. Does that have implications on how much throughput? It does, because if you have a car that has a signal that communicates to another car, those two cars can run closer together because they're not going to have an accident because they're synced up. And so I do think there will be implications, but I would say it this way. I would say that I would be looking at what the known world is in terms of the future and trying to plan for that. So for instance, it isn't just connected vehicles, it's also vehicle to infrastructure, and thinking through how you're going to have digital roadways that can leverage the technology that you already know is coming into the auto space. Those I think are relatively safe bets, and I don't think there's a reason why we shouldn't be trying to incorporate that now. Separate and apart from that, one of the things that we're really trying to push through our Grow America Act is an only dig once policy, where in many of the rural parts of Louisiana that are not connected to the internet, allowing departments of transportation to put fiber optic into the roadways as they're doing road projects so that we can close the digital divide in many rural parts of the state. So those are the types of things I think we should be doing. There will be technologies that we can't contemplate today, but there are an awful lot that we can, and I think we should be reacting to that.
And I agree with your assessment of that. One thing that we're doing at the Department of Transportation is we've created a team of people to be looking to the future, looking at the technologies, staying abreast, staying up to date with it, and sort of thinking, getting them to start thinking a little bit outside the box. What do we need to be doing on our transportation system to prepare for that? So I think what you spoke about, I mean, you've got to plan for some near term, but you've got to plan for that long term. So we're excited about this group, and there's a lot of energetic younger people on this group, and they're really excited about that opportunity.
Secretary Fox, you talked about the growth in this area, certainly post-Katrina, and continuing with some of our economic development opportunities. As we think about dealing with that growth, we're also challenged certainly by the gas tax challenges up at the federal level and at the state level, and the fact that you know, the buying power of those pennies is not where it used to be. What can you say to communities like ours who are trying to think big, but also understanding that the resources may be shrinking?
Yes, this is a really important question. It is particularly important in the South. And the reason I say that is because the report the Secretary LaBaugh mentioned, the Beyond Traffic report that we did a 30-year forecast of transportation needs in the country. And two important things that we found. One, the country's population is going to grow by 70 million people over the next 30 years. Okay? So that's like fact number one. Fact number two, most of the growth is coming to the South. So the commute that you have now, you get tied up for 20 minutes getting someplace, you know, it's going to get worse. At current funding levels, it's going to get worse. And so here's what I say to that. I think in the South, and I can say this because I'm from the South, if you haven't been able to detect that, I think the South has been playing small ball with transportation. I think we have been auto-dependent for at least 2 or 3 generations, and I don't think we can afford to do that. I think we have to think in terms of like, we're going to have much more population density in the South than we've had before. And that means that, like, you know, the environment where you have like single family houses separated by 2 acres apiece, there's going to be pressure to build more density into smaller spaces, which means more cars on the road, which means more congestion, et cetera. And so I think this idea of multimodalism is so critical in the South, and yet I think it's very hard to do politically, but it's very important to do. I think it's also very important to think in terms of, and one of the reasons why I'm glad you're doing this conference is that land use is connected to this. So if my nearest grocery store is half a mile away, I might take that trip by walking, I might take that trip on a bicycle, I might take the trip in a car, I might even take a short bus route. But if it's 2 miles away, I'm going to probably hop in my car and go. And so land use can play a role in trying to make it easier for people to exercise the choices they have. But again, that's a local decision. I'm not going to tell you, you know, where to put your grocery stores. But your city council has zoning laws, presumably, and other things that they can do to try to help make these trips shorter. Because if you give people shorter trips, now you don't have many folks getting on I-10 and I-12, because you need the trucks on I-12, you need people taking long trips on I-12, but if you can keep those shorter trips off of I-10 and I-12, you'll have a little more capacity on those highways. This is tough love, by the way. I'm telling you stuff not because it's like my favorite thing to do. I hope you're not throwing tomatoes at me, but I'm telling you this because I don't think we've got the memo yet. You look at where population density is in this country, and those systems are almost all multimodal. And you look at some of the areas that are also fast growing, like the West, people are starting to think in terms of multimodal. I think in the South, it's been harder. And yes, you've got amazing inland waterways in this state that you could probably make even greater use of. And I think some of the great designs your secretary is talking about are phenomenal, but you're gonna need everything you've got. And so I think that like this issue of cost, we have to think in terms of what it's gonna cost us if we don't do something big and bold here, because it's gonna get more expensive if you're sitting in traffic.
Yeah, you brought up the waterways, and one thing that we do know is that we do have capacity on our waterways. We're not fully utilizing the capacity on our waterways, and so that was a lot of the discussion that we had putting our statewide transportation plan together, was just talking about all these, the modes, and then how do you integrate the modes together.
Yep.
Mr. Secretary, you talked about the need for a long-term transportation bill, and you talked about the need for transportation choice. Both are very important. Right now, the House bill is under debate on the floor, and the Russell Amendment is on the floor right now. Just got an email about it. The Russell Amendment would prohibit any federal funding from going to streetcar projects like the one we're trying to advance here in Baton Rouge. So, 2 points. In the short term, will Tiger 8 provide funds perhaps to continue projects like this going forward next year and in the short term? And in the long term, how do we convince those in Congress who don't see the need for transportation choice and who would argue against it to maintain funding for things that are game changers like the streetcar project here?
Yeah, I think this gets squarely into the debate about whether transportation is throughput or whether it's revitalization. And I don't think it's either or. I think it's both. And, you know, we'll see how this amendment does on the House side. But I think one of the ironies of, I don't know where Congressman Russell is from. Where? Oklahoma. One of the ironies here is that I think there's actually a streetcar in Oklahoma. But one of the ironies is that a lot of the challenges to multimodalism are coming politically from the South, which is exactly the part of the country that probably is going to need it the most. And I just think this is an issue where folks just have to raise their voices. And I'm going to also offer this, which is that I fundamentally believe that whether it's streetcars or commuter rail or airports or highways, this is not a partisan issue. Transportation is not inherently partisan. And so I think we have a chance in transportation to have an earnest dialogue with anybody about the need for a multimodal system. And I think once people understand the local needs and the local push-pulls, it's a conversation you can really have with people. So I have hope that that's a conversation. If we have to have it immediately, we can do it if this amendment passes. But I think that you're talking to your representatives about why a project like this Nicholson streetcar makes sense here is illuminating to folks who don't necessarily think that something like that can be effective here.
Secretary Fox,
Yeah.
while it's encouraging to note that a new 6-year bill might be something we can look forward to here soon, what's your sense of the Congress's attitude about providing new revenues? We know the trust fund is bankrupt. We're in the same situation here in Louisiana. So is there going to be new revenue?
Well, that is also a matter of debate. The bill that passed out of the House committee was essentially a flat funding bill. There was a little bit of inflation built into it, but not real growth. The Senate passed a bill with about 5% over inflation added into it. Both bills, I should say, are bills that have 6 years of policy and 3 years of actual funding in them. So, and what Congress has been doing is when they can't find the means to raise revenue somehow, the way they've been paying for things is showing offsets. Offsets aren't exactly paid for, as what they are is almost an accounting way of showing that you're reducing spending in one place to add spending someplace else. And so both bills at this point are being paid for by different offsets. Now, if you want to get even further into like the geekery of legislative stuff, the interesting thing about this bill is that it actually is, according to CBO, going to reduce the deficit because there's a $15 billion gap every year that we're showing in the amount of gas tax revenues that are coming in against the baseline funding levels, the sort of running average of funding levels. And so filling that gap doesn't score negatively on the budget. So in fact, Congress could decide not to use an offset for that $15 billion gap, and it would score net on the budget and use the difference to put more money into the annual allocation, which we've tried to suggest, but nobody's listening. So I just think overall, Congress is, I'm glad they're moving a bill forward. It's better than not moving a bill forward. But I still don't think people have reckoned with the fact that if we continue to invest at levels that are less than what the country needs, we're not going to get a better system out of it. You know, I'm having to exercise some unique authorities to basically oversee the safety functions in the transit system in Washington because it's falling apart. I'm having to go and arm wrestle with leaders in the New York region over some tunnels that if we're not careful, they're going to fall apart on us and create another disaster. And frankly, as a Secretary of Transportation, I'd much rather be working on stuff that's going to like improve people's access, but we're doing damage control. And frankly, I think people who will be sitting in this seat in future years, if we're not careful, that's all they're going to be doing. And that's not what this country is about. So, you know, how Congress gets to the right revenue levels is something they're going to have to figure out. But I think that we are just not even, we have the ambition of a thimble right now. And we need to have a much greater level of ambition.
Secretary Fox, I have a follow-up question on revenues.
Yeah.
We know that the tax on the gallon of gas is a flat tax, and that's been a big problem. It hasn't been increased, so it doesn't. And as we get better mileage cars, it's actually given us a reduced amount of revenue in the per gallon tax. But in the short run, it seems like that may be the only really way to raise new revenues would be to increase the gas tax. So that's a kind of a short-term issue, and it would actually only be good until the inflation caught up again. So in the long range, some people have suggested it'd be more equitable to have a vehicle miles of travel kind of tax, so that it would be equitable to how much you actually use the facilities based on a vehicle, or in some way even for transit users to pay a per mile, user fee for per mile of travel. And some of the states have done actually pilot studies, and I wonder what's being done at the national level to encourage that. A thought about vehicle miles of travel.
Yeah.
Kind of
so there's a pilot that's happening in Oregon on this, and I think it's going to be illuminating for everybody to see how it works. It's a fairly small-scale pilot. Two of the big issues that have been raised on vehicle miles traveled, or VMT as they call it, are number one, the big brother issue. Is the government going to be looking over the shoulder at where you're going, and how do you account for that? And two, the administrative costs of being able to collect the revenue off of it. I don't think either one of those issues are per se deal breakers in terms of being able to figure it out, but this pilot's going to help us learn more about how that could actually work. So I think that's a conversation we're going to need to have. I don't think we're going to have it this time around, but I think the next time a bill comes up, we're going to have some serious conversation about structural changes of the order that you're talking about.
Hi.
What's that? All right, fantastic.
Oh, that's good.
There you go.
We have time for one more question.
Oh, good. I've got the mic.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Thank you so much, Secretary Fox, for being here, and thank you, Sherry LaBeouf, for all of your visionary leadership in our state. A constant theme of this the Smart Growth Summit has been the focus on climate change, as it's something that we know very well and are experiencing here in Louisiana. Can you talk about the provisions being made at the DOT from your climate action plans, and how you're thinking about standards for the future and rebuilding the cities that work with the weather of the future. Thank
Yeah,
you.
so two things on climate change. Prevention, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure in climate change. And so there's a lot we're doing on the prevention side, including some of the most forceful raising of fuel standards in the world, as we're going to see all of our cars on the market over the next 10 years or so become much more fuel efficient than they are today. I think twice as much from when the CAFE standards were raised earlier in the administration. We're also working to raise fuel standards for medium and heavy trucks as well. And so I think that'll play a big role in trying to cut down, because as you know, mobile sources are one of the largest contributors to the toxic chemicals that are causing climate change. But perhaps more squarely on your point, we're learning a lot about how to build to a higher level of resilience through many of these disasters, including Hurricane Katrina here in Louisiana and Superstorm Sandy up in the Northeast. And what that's making us do is to think differently about how we design our infrastructure, putting bridges at a slightly higher elevation and planning, instead of for 100-year floods, for 1,000-year floods. Putting the stoplight poles deeper into the ground so they're less likely to be upended by a storm. In New York City, in the subway system, we're actually installing electrical wiring above the trains, not below the trains where they were, because we found that that also was a vulnerability. So these lessons that we're learning as we rebuild in these two incredibly important parts of our country are being incorporated into standards elsewhere as we confront these challenges. Again, recognizing that on coastal areas there's certain impacts that we need to anticipate better. On the inland parts of the United States, there are different push-pulls, including tornadoes and other types of events that we need to think about differently as our weather patterns change. But hopefully, the things that the President's doing with his overall climate action plan will have a major impact on reducing the likelihood of these events by reducing climate change overall.
Well, thank you. And in the New Orleans area, when we rebuilt the Twin Span Bridge, we built it higher
Exactly.
and better after Katrina. So hopefully next storm won't have the domino effect on it like it did Katrina. Well, that concludes this session. I do want to just a shout out and thank H&TB for being the sponsor of this session. We certainly appreciate your support and all of our sponsors for this conference. And Boo, I'm going to hand it over to you. And again, Secretary Fox, I just want to thank you again for you're always so generous with your time, and just appreciate so much your vision and your time with us. Thank you.
Again, I would like to thank Secretary Anthony Fox, Sherry LaBaugh, Mayor Kip Holden. What an amazing way to complete the best summit we've ever had. Thank you, Secretary Fox. Thank you, Sherry LaBaugh. Thank you, Mary Holden. There are a couple of people in the House I'd like to recognize: Regina Barrow, Sharon Weston Broom, Steve Carter. These are legislators that actually believe in the work that we're doing and support the things when we ask them to. So I want you to thank them. 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 I want you